The Galactic Council chamber hummed with the soft blue glow of crystalline walls, each surface etched with the sacred laws that had governed civilized space for over 10 million years. Ambassador Zethkar of the Hegemony stood before the assembled representatives, his four arms gesturing dramatically as he addressed the crowd. Esteemed colleagues, his voice resonated through the translation matrix. We gather today to discuss a matter of grave concern. The humans have violated Directive 847 Alpha. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. Even the usually stoic Crystalline Communion members seemed to shimmer with anxiety. Directive 847 Alpha wasn't just any law. It was the oldest rule in the Galactic Codex, written in the blood of civilizations that had learned the hard way what happened when you push too far. Chancellor Mordun of the Wise Collective leaned forward on her hovering platform. That's impossible, Ambassador. No species has been foolish enough to break that directive in over 3 million years. The consequences are well documented. Zethkar's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. I present evidence to the Council. The chamber's central hologram activated, displaying footage from a remote system on the galaxy's edge. Behold, the human colony of New Terra. 3 days ago, they encountered a void drake. The assembled delegates watched in horror as the massive creature, a living nightmare of shadow and teeth spanning several kilometers, descended upon the human settlement. Void drakes were ancient beings, older than most stellar formations, and the directive was clear. When encountering such entities, all civilized species must flee immediately and report the sighting to the Council for proper containment procedures. The humans should have evacuated, Zethkar continued. Instead, they did this. The hologram shifted, showing human vessels, tiny compared to the Drake, moving into attack formation. Energy weapons that shouldn't have been able to even scratch the creature's hide began firing concentrated beams. But that wasn't what made the delegates recoil in their seats. They're not just attacking it, whispered representative cliques of the peaceful merchants. They're actually hurting it. The Drake's otherworldly shriek echoed through the chamber's audio system as human weaponry tore through its seemingly impenetrable flesh. What followed defied everything the Council thought they knew about the ancient entities. The humans weren't just fighting back, they were winning. This violation of Directive 847 Alpha cannot stand, Zethkar declared. The humans must be contained before they upset the cosmic balance that has kept our galaxy stable for eons. High Arbiter Yulthes, leader of the Council, raised her crystalline staff for silence. Her ancient voice carried the weight of millennia. The directive exists for good reason. When the predecessor empire attempted to harness Void Drake power, their entire civilization was consumed in shadow. When the tech sovereigns tried to study them, they vanished overnight, leaving only empty worlds. The rule has saved countless lives. Then why? Interrupted a new voice. Didn't anyone bother to tell us about it? The chamber fell silent as a figure stepped through the main entrance. Admiral Sarah Chun of a human colonial defense force walked with confidence that seemed almost reckless to the assembled aliens. Her simple military uniform stood in stark contrast to the elaborate robes and biomechanical enhancements of the other delegates. Admiral Chun, the High Arbiter, said carefully, "You were not summoned to this session." "No, I wasn't," Sarah replied, moving to the center of the chamber. "Because apparently nobody thought to mention your little rule book to humanity when we joined this council 5 years ago. Funny how that works." Zethkar's four arms crossed defensively. "Ignorance of the law is no excuse for ignorance." Sarah laughed, a sound that somehow managed to carry both humor and menace. "Oh, Ambassador, you don't understand. We're not ignorant of your laws. We just don't care about this one." The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. The High Arbiter struck her staff against the floor repeatedly. "Order! Order! Admiral, you cannot simply disregard cosmic law." Sarah turned to face the massive holographic display, where the aftermath of the human Drake battle still played. The creature lay defeated, its massive form being carefully dissected by human science teams. "You want to know what's funny about your oldest rule? You made it because you were afraid. Every species in this galaxy, when faced with something bigger and scarier than them, runs away and makes a law about it. She gestured toward the human fleet on the display. We called it Tuesday. The silence that followed was deafening. In the back of the chamber, ancient monitoring systems that had remained dormant for millions of years began to activate, as if the galaxy itself was taking notice of what had just been said. High Arbiter Yulthes spoke slowly, her voice carrying a warning that transcended translation. Admiral, you do not understand the forces you are tampering with. Sarah's smile was sharp as a blade. No, Arbiter. You don't understand the forces you've been hiding from the emergency session convened 6 hours later in the Council's restricted archives, deep beneath the primary chambers. Here, among records older than most star systems, the truth of Directive 847 Alpha lay buried in crystalline memory cores that few living beings had ever accessed. High Arbiter Yulthes moved with reverence among the ancient storage units, her luminous form casting dancing shadows on walls covered in warnings written in dead languages. Representatives from the galaxy's oldest civilizations had gathered, beings whose ancestors had witnessed the birth of the directive itself. Perhaps, suggested Elder Vexhai of the Timekeepers, his voice like grinding stone, we should show the human what her people are truly facing. Admiral Chun stood with her arms crossed, flanked by 2 human marines who looked distinctly uncomfortable, surrounded by beings that existed partially outside normal space-time. I'm listening. The High Arbiter touched a control surface, and the chamber filled with images from an era when the galaxy was young. Ancient civilizations, their cities spanning entire continents, their technology capable of manipulating reality itself. Behold the predecessor empire at its height. They ruled 10,000 systems, commanded forces that could extinguish stars. The images shifted, showing the same world transformed into barren wastelands, their surfaces scarred by claw marks kilometers wide. This is what remained after they attempted to capture a void drake brood mother. Not destroy, capture. They wanted to study its reality warping abilities. Sarah watched without flinching as the hologram showed the Empire's final days. Massive ships fleeing through space, pursued by shadows that seemed to devour light itself. How many died? 47 billion souls, Elder Vexhai answered, consumed by darkness that still haunts those systems. We have maintained beacon warnings around the dead zones for 8 million years. Another delegate, Representative Kthara of the Shell Worlds, stepped forward. Her chitinous form clicked nervously. Admiral, your species cannot comprehend what you have awakened. Void drakes exist partially in dimensions that mortal minds cannot process. Contact with them drives lesser beings to madness. Lesser beings? Sarah raised an eyebrow. The tech sovereigns thought themselves superior as well. The High Arbiter continued, activating another memory core. They believed their cybernetic enhancements made them immune to the Drake's reality-warping presence. They built containment facilities, developed weapons specifically designed to fight the entities. The hologram showed a civilization of cyborgs, their bodies more machine than flesh, constructing massive installations around a captured Drake. For 3 standard years, they held one prisoner. They learned to harvest its essence, to power their machines with fragments of primordial darkness. The images turned horrific as the facility's security feeds showed the final moments. The cyborgs' mechanical components suddenly turning against their organic parts, their own technology becoming a weapon of self-destruction. In one night, their entire species ceased to exist. Not death erasure, as if they had never been. The Drakes, Elder Vexhai explained, do not simply kill. They unmake. Reality bends around them until existence itself becomes uncertain. This is why the directive exists, Admiral. Not from cowardice, but from wisdom bought with countless lives. Sarah nodded slowly, apparently digesting the information. Then she pulled out a small device and activated it. The chamber filled with new images, footage from New Terra's encounter with the Drake. Computer, show them the post-battle analysis. The hologram displayed human scientists working around the defeated creature's corpse. But instead of the horror and madness that should have consumed them, the humans worked with methodical precision. Some wore no protection at all, walking casually around organs that defied geometric understanding. Dr. Martinez, Sarah called to one of the figures in the display. Give our guests your preliminary report. A young woman in a lab coat looked up from what appeared to be a sample of crystallized shadow. Oh, hey, Admiral. This thing is fascinating. We've confirmed that its biology operates on non-Euclidean principles, but human pattern recognition seems to be naturally immune to the usual reality distortion effects. The delegates stared in stunned silence as the human scientist continued cheerfully. The energy matrix it uses is completely unlike anything in our databases, but Henderson in engineering thinks he can reverse engineer their propulsion system. Oh, and psychological effects? Turns out they only work on species with certain neural pathway configurations. Humans apparently lack the specific brain structures that make us susceptible. Representative Kthara's voice was barely a whisper. Impossible. Dr. Martinez shrugged on the display. Not impossible, just improbable. Evolution is funny that way. While your species developed complex sensory organs to detect dimensional anomalies, probably as a survival mechanism, humans evolved pattern recognition systems optimized for Earth's chaotic environment. We see the drakes as just another predator. The High Arbiter's crystalline form flickered with what could only be described as panic. Admiral, you must understand, if you continue this path, if you study these entities, you risk unleashing forces that could destroy the galaxy. Sarah's expression grew serious. Arbiter, with all due respect, you've spent millions of years hiding in fear of these things. Every time someone tried to study them, your solution was to make it illegal and hope they go away. She gestured to the humans working calmly around the Drake remains. We spent 6 months fighting these things on the Rim worlds before someone bothered to tell us they were supposed to be scary. In that time, we've learned more about their capabilities than your entire council has discovered in eons. Elder Vexhi's ancient voice carried deep concern. And what have you learned, human? Sarah's smile returned, sharper than before. That your oldest rule wasn't meant to protect the galaxy from the drakes. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. It was meant to protect the drakes from what might eventually find them. The chamber's warning systems began to activate as cosmic monitoring stations throughout the galaxy detected something stirring in the deep void. Ancient things that had slumbered between the stars since the universe was young. Now awakening to investigate what had dared to challenge their offspring, the alarm began as a low harmonic that made every surface in the council archives vibrate. Ancient warning systems, dormant for geological ages, awakened with a sound that bypassed normal hearing and resonated directly in the bones of every living creature present. High Arbiter Yulthes moved to a control console so old its symbols predated written language. Her crystalline fingers danced across surfaces that glowed with ominous red light. By the first compact, she whispered, the deep monitors are active. Representative Kthara's chitinous armor clicked rapidly, the shell world equivalent of panicked breathing. The last time the deep monitors activated was during the predecessor war. What could possibly, Admiral Chun, Elder Vexhi interrupted, his rocky features grave with concern, what exactly did your people do with the Drake remains? Sarah was already speaking into her communication device. Chun to Colonial Command. Sitrep on the New Terra Research Station. The response came immediately, crackling with static interference. Admiral, we're reading massive space-time distortions incoming from the Galactic Rim. Dr. Martinez's team detected the anomalies 3 hours ago and initiated Protocol 7. Protocol 7. The High Arbiter's translation matrix struggled with the unfamiliar term. Curiosity override, Sarah explained without looking up. When something scientifically interesting happens, our researchers are authorized to ignore evacuation orders until they understand what they're looking at. The assembled delegates exchanged horrified glances. Several representatives from a more cautious species began backing toward the exits. The holographic display activated without command, showing feed from monitoring stations scattered across the galaxy. In the empty void between spiral arms, something vast was moving. Not ships or constructs, but living things so enormous they warped space around them simply by existing. Ancient drakes, Elder Vexhai breathed. The parent generation. They've been sleeping in the galactic void since the universe cooled. The display showed creatures that dwarfed entire star systems, their forms defying comprehension as they drifted through space with purpose. Each movement sent ripples through dimensions that mortal minds weren't equipped to process. How many? Sarah asked, studying the readings with professional interest rather than the terror displayed by everyone else. 17 confirmed. The High Arbiter replied, her voice hollow. Each one capable of unmaking solar systems. They're responding to the death of their offspring. Ambassador Zethkar, who had been silent since the alarms began, suddenly found his voice. This is what we try to prevent. This is why the directive existed. Your species' recklessness has doomed us all. Sarah turned to face the panicking hegemony representative. Ambassador, with respect, you're making assumptions. She activated her own communication array, and the chamber filled with voices from human operations across the galaxy. Sent to all colonial defense forces. Sound general quarters. Implement Prometheus protocol across all sectors. What? The High Arbiter asked with growing dread. Is Prometheus protocol? Something we developed after the first 6 months of fighting drakes on the rim, Sarah replied. Computer, display human colonial defense readiness status. The hologram shifted to show human space, and the delegates gasped collectively. Every human world, every research station, every colonial outpost was not evacuating, they were mobilizing. Fleets that shouldn't have existed emerged from hidden locations. Installations that appeared to be civilian research facilities revealed themselves as military strongholds, and throughout human space, a network of defenses unlike anything the Council had ever seen came online. You were preparing for this, Representative Kthara accused. We were preparing for anything, Sarah corrected. It's what humans do. We plan for the worst-case scenario, and then build contingencies for when the worst case turns out to be worse than we imagined. Dr. Martinez's voice crackled through the communication system. Admiral, good news and bad news. The good news is that our analysis of the Drake physiology was correct. We can replicate their reality warping capabilities. And the bad news? Sarah asked. The incoming ancients aren't coming to avenge their offspring. According to the quantum resonance patterns we're detecting, they're coming to find out what happened to their food source. The chamber fell silent except for the continuing alarms. Elder Vexhai's ancient voice cracked with realization. Food source. Dr. Martinez's cheerful voice continued. Yeah, turns out the drakes aren't apex predators at all. They're basically space cows. The ancient drakes have been herding them for millions of years, using them to graze on the psychic energy produced by civilized species. Every time a species gets too advanced, too confident, the ancients send their cattle to feed on the resulting fear and despair. That's impossible, the High Arbiter protested. The historical records were written by traumatized survivors, Sarah interrupted. People who were so terrified they couldn't think clearly. But humans don't produce the right kind of psychic energy when we're scared. We get angry. And, apparently, angry tastes terrible to drakes. The holographic display showed the ancient drakes changing course slightly, their movements becoming more agitated as they encountered human defensive positions that weren't fleeing but instead taking aim. Ambassador Zitker's mandibles clicked frantically. You cannot possibly think to fight them. They are forces of nature. They predate star formation. Sarah's smile was sharp enough to cut Diamond. Ambassador, everything you just said makes them sound like a challenge. And humans love challenges. The communication array crackled again. All stations report ready, Admiral. Operation Ancient History is green across the board. Ancient History? The High Arbiter asked weakly. We're about to show the galaxy what happens when someone mistakes humans for cattle, Sarah replied. Computer, open a channel to the approaching ancients. Let's see if we can't negotiate before we have to demonstrate why your oldest rule was the wrong rule. In the depths of space, 17 beings older than most galaxies received a transmission in a language they had never heard, from a species that should have been cowering in terror. The message was simple, delivered in Admiral Chen's steady voice. Unknown entities, you are approaching human-controlled space. State your intentions or alter course. You have 5 minutes to comply. The ancient drakes paused in their advance, perhaps for the first time in their incomprehensibly long existence encountering prey that was issuing ultimatums. The response came not in words, but in a wave of psychic pressure that would have driven most species to madness. Ancient minds, vast and cold as the void between galaxies, touched the human communication networks with the casual indifference of giants noticing insects. In the Council archives, sensitive species began collapsing as the mental contact washed over them. Representative Tharias Chitinous form seized as her nervous system overloaded. Elder Vexhai, despite his eons of experience, began fragmenting at the edges where his rocky composition met the air. Admiral Chen stood unmoved, though her marines showed signs of strain. Interesting, she said, checking her readings. Computer, boost the psychic dampening field around our alien guests and analyze that transmission. Analysis complete, came the reply from the human AI systems. The entities are expressing a concept roughly translatable as, small things should not speak. Return to your proper place as sustenance. Not very diplomatic, Sarah observed. She opened the channel again. Ancient entities, this is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Human Colonial Defense Force. Your cattle are dead, your feeding operation is terminated, and you have 4 minutes to withdraw before we demonstrate why that's a very good idea. The psychic response this time carried undertones of what could only be described as amusement. Through the translation matrix came concepts that barely formed coherent thought. Images of civilizations ground to dust, of worlds stripped of all life, of entire species erased from existence for the crime of defiance. High Arbiter Yulthes, shielding herself behind emergency barriers, managed to speak. Admiral, please. You must understand, these beings have existed since the cosmic background radiation still held warmth. They have ended civilizations just by thinking about them. Sarah's communication device crackled with reports from across human space. Admiral, ancient contact established at Proxima Defense Station. Enemy entity measures approximately 2.7 light hours in length. It's trying to feed on our fear. And Lieutenant Morrison reports it seems frustrated. Quote, like trying to drink sand, end quote. Sarah turned back to the cowering alien delegates. The thing about being an apex predator for millions of years is that you forget how to handle prey that fights back. These ancients have been farming the galaxy so long they've forgotten what real resistance looks like. The holographic display showed the first direct contact as an ancient drake approached the Proxima system. The creature was indeed vast beyond comprehension, its form shifting through dimensions that made tracking difficult. As it neared the human defensive positions, reality itself began to warp. But instead of fleeing, the human ships advanced. Weapons free, came the order across all channels. Engage with Project Excalibur Ordnance. What happened next defied everything the Council thought they knew about physics, warfare, and the natural order of the universe. Human vessels, tiny as gnats compared to the ancient, opened fire with weapons that shouldn't have existed. Ow! Elder Vexhai gasped as energy beams not just struck the ancient, but actually wounded it. Dark ichor that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously sprayed from wounds that physics said were impossible. Dr. Martinez's voice provided running commentary. Turns out when you dissect enough Drake offspring, you learn that their reality warping abilities follow consistent rules. We've weaponized those rules. The ancient's response was immediate and terrifying. Space itself began unraveling around the human fleet, causality breaking down as the creature attempted to erase its attackers from existence itself. Deploying temporal anchors, reported the human commander on scene. Reality stabilizers online. All ships maintain temporal integrity. Somehow, impossibly, the human vessels continued to exist even as the ancient tried to retroactively prevent their creation. Ambassador Zethkar's forearms trembled as he watched the display. This is impossible. Nothing can resist temporal erasure. Actually, Sarah said conversationally, turns out humans have a unique relationship with causality. Something about our evolution in a chaotic environment made us remarkably resistant to paradox effects. Dr. Kim published a paper about it last month. The battle continued for what felt like hours, but registered as minutes on the chronometers. The Ancient, for the first time in its unimaginably long existence, found itself not just challenged, but genuinely threatened. Its psychic attacks found no purchase on human minds that seemed to treat cosmic horror as a Tuesday afternoon inconvenience. Ancient is attempting withdrawal, reported the Proxima commander. Pursuit protocols? Negative, Sarah replied. Let it run. We want the others to see what happened here. Representative Kthara, recovered enough to speak, whispered, You let it escape on purpose. Information warfare, Sarah confirmed. 17 Ancients are scary, but 17 Ancients who know that one of them got beaten by creatures a fraction of their size? That's leverage. The communication array crackled with a new transmission, this time from multiple sources as the ancient drakes began communicating among themselves in frequencies that spanned the electromagnetic spectrum and beyond. Translation coming through, reported the human AI. They're negotiating with each other. The one from Proxima is warning the others about human defensive capabilities. High Arbiter Yulthes slowly lowered her defensive barriers, her crystalline form still flickering with residual psychic interference. Admiral Chun, what are your intentions? Sarah studied the tactical displays showing the ancient drakes holding position at the edge of the galaxy, no longer advancing, but not retreating either. My intentions, Arbiter, are to have a conversation. But this time we're going to talk as equals. She opened a channel to the ancients, her voice carrying across the void to beings older than recorded time. Ancient entities, you've seen what happens when you try to treat humans as livestock. Now let's discuss the new arrangement. The response came not as psychic pressure, but as actual words, spoken in a voice like the grinding of continental plates. Small things, what do you propose? Simple, Sarah replied. You stop treating the galaxy like your personal farm, and we don't turn the rest of your cattle into weapons that can hurt you. Think of it as retirement. In the long silence that followed, monitoring stations throughout the galaxy detected something unprecedented. Ancient drakes learning what it meant to feel uncertainty 3 days later. The Galactic Council convened in its largest chamber, modified with new shielding technology that had been reverse-engineered from ancient drake biology and implemented with typical human efficiency. Representatives from species that had never before shared the same space sat together, united by the shared experience of watching their entire understanding of the universe get rewritten. Admiral Chin stood before a very different audience than the one she had faced a week earlier. Gone was the patronizing authority of species who thought they understood cosmic law. In its place was something humanity had rarely encountered from alien civilizations, respect tinged with healthy caution. The negotiations, Sarah announced, are complete. High Arbiter Yulthes, her crystalline form reinforced with human-designed psychic dampening matrices, gestured for her to continue. Tell us the terms, Admiral. The ancient drakes have agreed to what we're calling the new compact, Sarah began. First, they will withdraw to the galactic void and cease their farming operations. Second, any species that wishes to study or interact with them may do so, but only through human intermediaries. Third, they will provide technological information in exchange for what they call interesting experiences. Ambassador Zethkar, his four arms no longer gesturing with the same arrogance, asked carefully, And what do they consider interesting? Sarah's smile carried genuine amusement. Human entertainment, apparently. They've become fascinated with our fiction, our art, our music. Beings that have existed since cosmic dawn find our creativity refreshing. Representative Kthara clicked her approval. And in return, they're sharing knowledge about the deep structure of reality. Information that will advance every species in the galaxy by millennia. Sarah activated a holographic display showing technological schematics that made even the most advanced alien minds struggle to comprehend. Faster-than-light travel without spatial distortion, energy generation from dimensional fold points, matter conversion at the quantum level. Elder Vexhai rumbled with interest. And the price for this knowledge? We have to promise not to use it to hunt down any more ancients for study, Sarah replied. Apparently, our dissection techniques are very thorough. Dr. Martinez's voice joined the conversation through the communication system. Admiral, the ancients have also requested permission to establish what they call observation posts near human worlds. They want to study us as much as we want to study them. Observation posts? The High Arbiter asked with concern. Think of them as cosmic graduate students, Sarah explained. They're genuinely curious about how we work. Apparently, in all their eons of existence, they've never encountered a species that treats the impossible as merely improbable. The chamber buzzed with conversation as delegates absorbed the implications. Representative Kthara raised a chitinous limb. Admiral, what does this mean for the old laws? Directive 847 Alpha and the others. Sarah looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives, beings from across the galaxy who had spent millions of years living by rules written in fear. That's up to you. But I'd suggest that maybe it's time to rewrite your law books. Based on what principles? Elder Vexhai asked. Curiosity instead of caution. Exploration instead of isolation. Sarah gestured to the displays showing human and alien scientists already working together on ancient-provided technology. You've spent so long hiding from the universe that you forgot what it's like to actually live in it. High Arbiter Yulthes moved to the center of the chamber, her ancient presence commanding attention. Admiral Chun, your species has accomplished in days what we thought impossible across eons. But I must ask, what are your people's long-term intentions? Sarah considered the question carefully. Arbiter, humans have one core principle that drives everything we do. We refuse to accept that anything is impossible until we've personally tried it and failed, usually several times. She turned to address the full assembly. We don't want to rule the galaxy. We don't want to replace your governments or remake your societies. We just want to see what's out there and figure out how it works. And if you encounter something that cannot be reasoned with, something that must be fought, Ambassador Zethkar asked. Sarah's expression grew serious. Then we'll fight it. And we'll probably win because that's what humans do. But we'll try talking first because that's also what humans do. The communication array activated with an incoming transmission from deep space. The voice that emerged was the continental grinding of an ancient drake. But the words were surprisingly gentle. Small things called humans, it said. We have completed analysis of your cultural transmissions. We wish to understand the concept you call friendship. Sarah looked around the chamber at the assembled delegates, representatives of civilizations that had spent millions of years fearing the dark between the stars. That, she said, we can teach you. In the months that followed, the galaxy would change in ways no one could have predicted. Ancient technologies merged with mortal ingenuity. Species that had never cooperated began working together on projects that spanned star systems. The old laws, written in fear and maintained by caution, were quietly archived and replaced with new principles based on a radical concept that humanity had brought to the stars. The idea that the universe was meant to be explored, not endured. And in the deep void between galaxies, ancient drakes learned to laugh at human jokes while sharing secrets that rewrote the laws of physics. The oldest rule in the galaxy, never trifle with forces beyond understanding, had been replaced with a new rule that was uniquely human. Never assume anything is beyond understanding until you've given it a proper try. The galaxy was no longer a dark place to be feared. It was an infinite playground full of interesting problems to solve, and humanity had brought their friends along for the adventure. The Galactic Council chamber hummed with the soft blue glow of crystalline walls, each surface etched with the sacred laws that had governed civilized space for over 10 million years. Ambassador Zethkar of the hegemony stood before the assembled representatives, his four arms gesturing dramatically as he addressed the crowd. Esteemed colleagues, his voice resonated through the translation matrix. We gather today to discuss a matter of grave concern. The humans have violated Directive 847 Alpha. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. Even the usually stoic crystalline communion members seemed to shimmer with anxiety. Directive 847 Alpha wasn't just any law. It was the oldest rule in the Galactic Codex, written in the blood of civilizations that had learned the hard way what happened when you push too far. Chancellor Mordun of the Wise Collective leaned forward on her hovering platform. That's impossible, Ambassador. No species has been foolish enough to break that directive in over 3 million years. The consequences are well documented. Zethkar's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. I present evidence to the Council. The chamber's central hologram activated, displaying footage from a remote system on the galaxy's edge. Behold, the human colony of New Terra. 3 days ago, they encountered a void drake. The assembled delegates watched in horror as the massive creature, a living nightmare of shadow and teeth spanning several kilometers, descended upon the human settlement. Void drakes were ancient beings, older than most stellar formations, and the directive was clear. When encountering such entities, all civilized species must flee immediately and report the sighting to the Council for proper containment procedures. The humans should have evacuated, Zethkar continued. Instead, they did this. The hologram shifted, showing human vessels, tiny compared to the Drake, moving into attack formation. Energy weapons that shouldn't have been able to even scratch the creature's hide began firing concentrated beams. But that wasn't what made the delegates recoil in their seats. They're not just attacking it, whispered representative cliques of the peaceful merchants. They're actually hurting it. The Drake's otherworldly shriek echoed through the chamber's audio system as human weaponry tore through its seemingly impenetrable flesh. What followed defied everything the Council thought they knew about the ancient entities. The humans weren't just fighting back, they were winning. This violation of Directive 847 Alpha cannot stand, Zethkar declared. The humans must be contained before they upset the cosmic balance that has kept our galaxy stable for eons. High Arbiter Yulthes, leader of the Council, raised her crystalline staff for silence. Her ancient voice carried the weight of millennia. The directive exists for good reason. When the predecessor empire attempted to harness Void Drake power, their entire civilization was consumed in shadow. When the tech sovereigns tried to study them, they vanished overnight, leaving only empty worlds. The rule has saved countless lives. Then, why? Interrupted a new voice. Didn't anyone bother to tell us about it? The chamber fell silent as a figure stepped through the main entrance. Admiral Sarah Chun of the Human Colonial Defense Force walked with confidence that seemed almost reckless to the assembled aliens. Her simple military uniform stood in stark contrast to the elaborate robes and biomechanical enhancements of the other delegates. Admiral Chun, the High Arbiter, said carefully, "You were not summoned to this session." "No, I wasn't," Sarah replied, moving to the center of the chamber. "Because apparently nobody thought to mention your little rule book to humanity when we joined this council 5 years ago. Funny how that works." Zethkar's four arms crossed defensively. "Ignorance of the law is no excuse for ignorance." Sarah laughed, a sound that somehow managed to carry both humor and menace. "Oh, Ambassador, you don't understand. We're not ignorant of your laws. We just don't care about this one." The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. The High Arbiter struck her staff against the floor repeatedly. "Order! Order! Admiral, you cannot simply disregard cosmic law." Sarah turned to face the massive holographic display, where the aftermath of the human-Drake battle still played. The creature lay defeated, its massive form being carefully dissected by human science teams. You want to know what's funny about your oldest rule? You made it because you were afraid. Every species in this galaxy, when faced with something bigger and scarier than them, runs away and makes a law about it. She gestured toward the human fleet on the display. We called it Tuesday. The silence that followed was deafening. In the back of the chamber, ancient monitoring systems that had remained dormant for millions of years began to activate, as if the galaxy itself was taking notice of what had just been said. High Arbiter Yul Thess spoke slowly, her voice carrying a warning that transcended translation. Admiral, you do not understand the forces you are tampering with. Sarah's smile was sharp as a blade. No, Arbiter. You don't understand the forces you've been hiding from.